After my sister's wedding, I found my savings gone. My stepmom smiled. Family shares everything. My name is Emma Rodriguez, and at 26, I believed I had successfully navigated the choppy waters of a blended family. I had my own apartment, a promising career in marketing, and enough savings to finally pursue my dream of opening my own consulting firm. Then came my half-sister's wedding that shattered everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. 48 hours after the celebration, I discovered my entire life savings, $52,300, had vanished from my account. When I confronted my stepmother, her response made my blood run cold. She simply smiled and said, "Family shares everything, Emma. It's time you learned that." Growing up in San Diego, I learned early that money was a source of constant stress in our household. My mother, Elena Rodriguez, was a hardworking dental hygienist who immigrated from Mexico when she was just 19. She raised me alone until I was 8, working double shifts to keep us afloat in our small two-bedroom apartment. Mom instilled in me the importance of financial independence from a young age. Mija, she would say in her gentle but firm voice, never depend on anyone else for your security. Money gives you choices, and choices give you freedom. When I was 8, Mom married David Chen, a charming insurance salesman with 2 children from his previous marriage, Marcus, who was 10, and Sarah, who was 6. David seemed like the perfect stepfather, attentive, funny, and genuinely caring toward both Mom and me. He brought stability to our chaotic life, and his steady income meant Mom could finally work normal hours. But David came with baggage. His ex-wife Vanessa Chin, a woman who seemed to view our blended family as a personal inconvenience. More concerning was David's casual relationship with money. While not irresponsible exactly, he was prone to impulse purchases and get-rich-quick schemes that never quite panned out. Mom quietly took over managing the household finances, a role she'd continue for the rest of their marriage. The real complication arrived when I was 12. David's mother, Helen Chin, moved in with us after a stroke left her needing care. What was supposed to be a temporary arrangement became permanent when it became clear that Helen's recovery would be limited. Helen was a traditional Chinese woman who had never fully accepted David's marriage to my mother, viewing our presence as an intrusion on her family legacy. Helen had very specific ideas about family hierarchy and money. In her worldview, David's children, Marcus and Sarah, were the real grandchildren deserving of investment and attention. I was an outsider who happened to live in the same house. She made her feelings known through small but consistent slights, gifts for Marcus and Sarah but not for me, college fund contributions that mysteriously never included my name, and constant references to real family versus step-family. Despite these challenges, I threw myself into academic and financial achievement. By 14, I was babysitting for neighbors and tutoring younger students. At 16, I got a job at a local bookstore, working 15 hours a week while maintaining a 4.0 GPA. Every dollar I earned went into a savings account that only Mom and I could access, a decision that would prove prophetic years later. "You're so driven, Emma," Mom would say proudly, watching me balance homework with work schedules. "Just like your grandmother." She came to this country with nothing and built everything through her own effort. David was supportive of my work ethic, though he occasionally made comments about how I didn't need to work so hard and should enjoy being a kid. Helen, predictably, viewed my jobs as evidence that Mom wasn't providing properly for me, conveniently ignoring the fact that Marcus and Sarah showed no similar initiative. High school brought new challenges. While Marcus coasted through with mediocre grades and Sarah focused primarily on social activities, I maintained my academic excellence while working part-time. College application season revealed the first major financial disparity in our family. Helen had been quietly funding college accounts for Marcus and Sarah for years, accounts that would cover their full tuition to state universities. When I asked about similar support for my education, Helen's response was chilling. "You have your mother's family for that. We take care of our own." The phrase "our own" would echo in my mind for years. Despite living in the same house for nearly a decade, I was still not considered our own. Mom was devastated by Helen's refusal to help with my college expenses, leading to several heated arguments with David. To his credit, David tried to convince his mother to reconsider, but Helen was immovable. "Emma is a smart girl," she conceded, "but she's not my responsibility. She can work her way through college like plenty of people do." And work I did. I secured partial scholarships to UC San Diego for marketing and communications, covering about 60% of my costs. The remaining expenses I handled through a combination of work-study programs, part-time jobs, and careful budgeting. While Marcus and Sarah enjoyed typical college experiences, spring break trips, Greek life, new cars for their 18th birthdays, I worked 25 hours a week at various campus jobs while carrying a full course load. Mom tried to help when she could, but Helen's medical expenses were mounting, and David's income, while steady, wasn't enough to cover both Helen's care and college support for me. "I'm sorry, Mija," Mom would say, tears at her eyes. "I wish I could do more." "You've done everything," I would assure her. "This is my path, and I'm proud to walk it." And I was proud most of the time. When doubt crept in, usually late at night when I was exhausted from studying after a double shift, I reminded myself of Mom's words about independence and choices. Every dollar I saved was a choice I was preserving for my future. During my junior year of college, tragedy struck. Mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. The diagnosis came late, and the cancer had already spread. Despite aggressive treatment, Mom's condition deteriorated rapidly. I took a leave of absence from school to care for her during her final months, a decision that Helen criticized as dropping out. Mom's final weeks were a blur of hospital visits, insurance battles, and difficult conversations. But one conversation stood out with crystal clarity. 3 days before she died, Mom called me to her bedside and pressed something into my hand, a small key. "Safety deposit box," she whispered. "Bank of America downtown. Everything I could save for you is there. Your grandmother's jewelry, some cash, and documents you'll need. Most importantly, Emma, remember what I taught you about independence. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for protecting what you've worked for." Her words seemed prophetic, though I didn't understand why at the time. Mom's death devastated me, but it seemed to galvanize something in Helen. Within weeks of the funeral, she began making comments about how the family needed to restructure and refocus on the core family unit. David, grief-stricken and overwhelmed with managing Helen's care alone, seemed to retreat from active parenting. I returned to finish my senior year of college, but the house I came home to during breaks felt different. Helen had rearranged Mom's belongings, putting most into storage and redecorating the common areas in a style that erased most traces of Mom's presence. When I pointed this out to David, he sighed heavily. "Emma, I know this is hard, but we all need to move forward. Mom wouldn't want us living in a shrine." But it wasn't about creating a shrine. It was about erasing Mom's existence to make room for Helen's vision of what the family should be. The summer after graduation, I landed an entry-level position at a boutique marketing firm in downtown San Diego. The salary was modest, $38,000 a year, but it came with excellent benefits and clear opportunities for advancement. I found a studio apartment in Hillcrest, determined to establish my independence. Helen's response to my move was telling. Finally, it's time she started taking care of herself instead of expecting family to support her. The irony was rich, considering I had been supporting myself for years while Helen had been supporting David's other children. For the next 2 years, I threw myself into work and building my savings. I lived modestly, cooking at home, shopping at thrift stores, and finding free entertainment around the city. Every month, I put 40% of my income into savings, an aggressive rate that my coworkers thought was extreme. "You're 24, my colleague Jessica would say. Live a little. Go on vacation. Buy some nice clothes." But I had a goal. I wanted to start my own marketing consultancy by the time I turned 27. Every dollar saved was a step closer to that dream. By my 26th birthday, I had accumulated $52,300 in my savings account, money that represented 3 years of sacrifice, careful planning, and unwavering focus. Meanwhile, David's family seemed to be thriving. Marcus had graduated and was working at Helen's friend's insurance agency, living at home rent-free, while saving for a house. Sarah was in her final year at UCLA, her expenses fully covered by Helen's college fund. Helen herself had recovered much of her mobility and had become increasingly involved in managing family finances. It was during this period that Sarah announced her engagement to Brandon Kim, a law student she'd met at UCLA. The engagement party, held at an upscale restaurant in La Jolla, was elaborate and expensive. Helen spared no expense, hiring a professional photographer, ordering custom decorations, and inviting over 100 guests. "This is what family celebrations should look like," Helen declared, surveying the festivities with satisfaction. "When you invest in family, family invests back." The wedding was planned for the following spring, a lavish affair at a resort in Napa Valley. Helen was funding most of it, with David contributing what he could. The total budget, I overheard during one family gathering, was approaching $80,000. "Grandma's making this her legacy wedding," Marcus confided to me during the engagement party. "She's been planning something like this since Sarah was little." I smiled and nodded, genuinely happy for Sarah despite the obvious favoritism. Sarah had always been kinder to me than Marcus, and her fiancé Brandon seemed like a genuinely good person. If Helen wanted to spend her money on an extravagant wedding, that was her choice. The months leading up to the wedding were filled with constant planning sessions, dress fittings, and family meetings I was rarely included in. When I was included, it was usually to be assigned some task, addressing invitations, coordinating with vendors, or helping with decorations. "Emma's so organized," Sarah would say gratefully. "You're like our free wedding planner." I didn't mind helping. Sarah was family, and I wanted her wedding to be beautiful. What I did mind was Helen's constant commentary about how real family pulled together for important events, with pointed looks in my direction. 3 weeks before the wedding, Helen made an announcement that should have been a red flag. She was hiring Marcus's girlfriend, Jennifer, to help coordinate the final wedding details. Jennifer was a part-time event planner with limited experience, but Helen was paying her $3,000 for 2 weeks of work. "It's important to keep business in the family," Helen explained. "Jennifer understands our values and priorities." David seemed uncomfortable with the arrangement, but said nothing. I wondered why Helen was hiring outside help when I had been coordinating most of the logistics for free, but I kept my questions to myself. The week before the wedding brought a flurry of last-minute preparations. I took 2 vacation days to help with final setup at the resort, driving up to Napa with David and Helen while Marcus and Jennifer handled vendor coordination. The resort was stunning, rolling vineyards, elegant architecture, and spectacular views. Helen had rented a block of rooms for family and close friends, sparing no expense to ensure everyone was comfortable. "This is how you celebrate family milestones," Helen said as we surveyed the venue. "No cutting corners, no half measures. Sarah will remember this day forever." The rehearsal dinner was held Friday night in the resort's private dining room. Helen gave a speech about family legacy, about how Sarah was carrying forward the Chin family traditions, and about how proud she was to invest in the next generation. It was a beautiful speech, though I couldn't help noticing that Mom's side of the family, my aunts and cousins who had driven up from San Diego, were mentioned only briefly. That night, I shared a room with Sarah, helping her with last-minute preparations and trying to calm her pre-wedding nerves. We stayed up late talking about her future with Brandon, their plans for law school and careers, and their dreams of starting a family. "I'm so grateful for everything Grandma's done," Sarah said as we finally prepared for bed. "I know I'm lucky to have this kind of support. You deserve it," I told her sincerely. "You're going to be a beautiful bride." What I didn't know was that while we were talking about the future, my own future was being systematically destroyed in ways I couldn't yet imagine. The wedding day dawned perfect, clear skies, gentle breeze, and golden California sunshine. I spent the morning helping Sarah get ready, managing the bridesmaids, and coordinating with the photographer. Despite not being in the wedding party, Helen had insisted on keeping it to immediate family and closest friends. I was still deeply involved in making sure everything ran smoothly. The ceremony was beautiful. Sarah looked radiant in her designer gown, Brandon was clearly overwhelmed with emotion, and even Helen seemed to soften during the vows. For a moment, watching David walk Sarah down the aisle, I felt the warm glow of family unity. The reception was equally spectacular. Helen had hired a professional DJ, a four-course plated dinner, and an open bar that flowed freely throughout the evening. During dinner, she gave another speech about family investment and legacy, presenting Sarah and Brandon with a check for $50,000 as a wedding gift to help them start their life together. The crowd gasped appreciatively. It was an incredibly generous gift, though I noticed David looked surprised by the amount. Clearly, Helen had made this decision independently. During the dancing portion of the evening, I found myself chatting with various family members, catching up with relatives I rarely saw, and enjoying the celebration. Jennifer, Marcus's girlfriend, seemed particularly interested in my work and life in San Diego. "Marketing consulting sounds so interesting," she said during one conversation. "You must make good money in that field." "It's steady," I replied carefully. Something about her probing questions felt off, but I attributed it to natural curiosity. Around 10 p.m., I realized I'd left my phone in the bridal suite upstairs, where I'd been helping Sarah get ready earlier. I excused myself from the dance floor and headed upstairs to retrieve it. As I approached the suite, I heard voices inside, Helen, Marcus, and Jennifer talking in hushed but urgent tones. The door was slightly ajar, and while I didn't intend to eavesdrop, their words stopped me cold. "The transfer worked perfectly," Jennifer was saying. Emma's banking app was still logged in on her phone from when she showed me that photo earlier. 3 transfers, all under $20,000 to avoid flags. My blood turned to ice. I pressed myself against the wall, straining to hear more. 52,000? Helen's voice was sharp. "That's more than we discussed." "It's exactly what was in the account," Marcus replied. Jennifer documented everything. "We can show Emma spent it on frivolous things if she makes a fuss." "The girl's been hoarding money for years," Helen said dismissively. "It's time she learned about family obligations. This wedding cost me my entire savings. Emma owes it to the family to contribute." Jennifer's voice was clinical. "I created fake receipts showing luxury purchases over the past 6 months. If she tries to claim theft, we can prove she's been living extravagantly and just forgot about the spending." I gripped the wall, feeling dizzy. They had stolen my entire savings. Worse, they had planned it meticulously, creating false evidence to cover their tracks. "What if she checks her account tonight?" Marcus asked nervously. "She won't," Helen replied confidently. "And even if she does, what can she do? Accuse her family of theft at her sister's wedding? Create a scene that ruins Sarah's special day? Emma's too predictable. She'll keep quiet to avoid drama." I heard footsteps approaching the door and quickly ducked into a nearby bathroom, my heart pounding. Through the crack in the door, I watched them leave the suite, Helen smoothing her dress and checking her appearance in the hallway mirror as if she hadn't just orchestrated the theft of my life savings. I waited until they were gone, then retrieved my phone with shaking hands. Sure enough, banking notifications filled my screen, notifications I'd missed while helping with wedding preparations. 3 transfers, each under $20,000, draining my account to $347.18. The transfers had been made to an account labeled Family Support Services, a name generic enough to seem legitimate at first glance. The timestamps showed they had occurred during the ceremony when my phone was in the bridal suite and I was downstairs watching Sarah exchange vows. I stood in that elegant hotel bathroom, staring at my phone screen, feeling my entire world collapse. 3 years of sacrifice, planning, and careful saving gone. Worse than the financial loss was the betrayal. Helen, Marcus, and Jennifer had planned this theft while I was helping make Sarah's wedding perfect. My first instinct was to march downstairs and confront them immediately, but Helen's words echoed in my mind. Create a scene that ruins Sarah's special day. This was still Sarah's wedding. Whatever I did next had to consider her innocent involvement in this betrayal. I spent the next hour in that bathroom, alternating between rage and disbelief. How had Jennifer accessed my banking app? When had I shown her anything on my phone? Then I remembered earlier during wedding photos, I had shown her pictures from a recent work conference, scrolling through my gallery. She must have memorized my banking app's location and somehow accessed it later. But how had she gotten my login credentials? The banking app required biometric authentication or a complex password. Then, with growing horror, I realized. During the reception, I had left my phone on the head table while dancing. Jennifer had been seated nearby, coordinating vendor payments. She could have accessed my phone multiple times throughout the evening. When I finally composed myself enough to return to the reception, the party was winding down. Sarah and Brandon were making their rounds, thanking guests for coming. Helen was holding court near the bar, accepting congratulations on the beautiful wedding. "There you are," Sarah exclaimed when she saw me. "I was looking for you. Thank you so much for everything today. I couldn't have done this without you." I hugged her tightly, fighting back tears. "It was beautiful, Sarah. You looked perfect." She pulled back, studying my face. "Are you okay? You look pale." "Just tired," I lied. "It's been a long day." Helen approached us, her face glowing with satisfaction. "Emma, wasn't this wonderful? This is what happens when family invests in family. Real celebration, real joy." The irony of her words, delivered hours after stealing my savings, was almost unbearable. "It was beautiful," I managed. "Sarah, dear, you and Brandon should get some rest," Helen continued. "Big day tomorrow with the brunch and gift opening." As Sarah hugged me goodbye, I whispered, "Have a wonderful honeymoon. You deserve all the happiness in the world." And I meant it. Sarah had done nothing wrong. She didn't deserve to have her wedding memories tainted by the crimes her grandmother had committed. The ride back to San Diego the next day was torture. I sat in the back seat while David drove and Helen narrated the wedding highlights, occasionally asking my opinion on various moments. Every word felt like acid in my wounds. "The wedding planner Jennifer was excellent," Helen commented.
"So efficient, so reorganized."
"Marcus is lucky to have found someone so capable." David glanced at her curiously. "I thought Emma was handling most of the coordination." "Oh, Emma helped," Helen said dismissively, "but Jennifer handled the real logistics. The financial transfers, vendor payments, that sort of thing. Much more professional." The casual mention of financial transfers made my stomach churn. Helen was practically confessing while simultaneously dismissing my contributions. When we finally reached San Diego, I went straight to my apartment, claiming exhaustion. In reality, I needed space to process what had happened and decide my next move. I spent Sunday night researching financial fraud procedures, documenting everything I could remember about the weekend, and trying to understand the legal implications of what had been done to me. The more I learned, the more complex the situation became. Monday morning, I called my bank's fraud department. The representative, a kind woman named Patricia, listened to my story with growing concern. "Ms. Rodriguez, these transfers were made using your authenticated banking app from your own device," she explained. "While you're claiming unauthorized access, the security protocols show legitimate authentication." "But I didn't make these transfers," I insisted. "My phone was accessed without my permission during a family event." "I understand this is distressing," Patricia said sympathetically. "We'll open a fraud investigation, but I need to be honest. Proving unauthorized access when the transfers came from your own device is extremely challenging. The process could take months, and there's no guarantee of recovery." I hung up feeling defeated, but not surprised. Jennifer had clearly researched the banking system's vulnerabilities before executing her plan. My next call was to David. I needed to know if he was aware of what had happened or if he was another victim of Helen's manipulation. "Emma?" David's voice was warm when he answered. "How are you feeling? You seemed tired yesterday." "David, I need to ask you something serious," I began carefully. "Did you know that Helen was planning to take money from my savings account for the wedding?" A long pause. "What are you talking about?" I explained what I had discovered, what I had overheard, and the devastating reality of my empty bank account. David listened in stunned silence. "Emma, that's impossible," he finally said. "Mom would never. How could she even access your account?" "Jennifer accessed my phone during the reception. I explained. I overheard them discussing it in the bridal suite. Another pause, longer this time. Emma, I think you might be confused. The stress of the weekend. Maybe some drinks at the reception. David, I know what I heard. I know what happened to my money. Look, David said, his tone becoming more formal. I understand you might be having financial stress. Starting a business is expensive, but accusing family members of theft. I'm not accusing, I interrupted. I'm telling you what happened. Emma, I think you should speak to someone. Maybe a counselor. Grief can manifest in unexpected ways, and with the anniversary of your mother's death coming up, I realized with growing horror that David either genuinely believed I was having some kind of breakdown, or he was complicit in Helen's plan. Either way, he wasn't going to help me. That afternoon, I contacted a lawyer specializing in financial crimes. James Morrison's office was downtown, and he agreed to see me the same day. Morrison listened to my story with professional detachment, taking notes and asking detailed questions about timing, evidence, and potential witnesses. Ms. Rodriguez, he said when I finished, you have a challenging case. The theft was clearly planned and executed by people who understood banking security protocols. However, proving it legally will be difficult. What are my options? Criminally, the police may investigate, but without direct evidence of the perpetrators accessing your device, they'll likely classify this as a family dispute. Civilly, we could pursue recovery of the funds, but again, the burden of proof is substantial. He leaned forward, his expression sympathetic. In cases like this, where family members are involved, I often recommend trying to resolve the matter privately first. Document everything, gather any evidence you can, and confront the accused directly. Sometimes the threat of legal action is enough to motivate restitution. I left his office feeling slightly more hopeful, but still overwhelmed by the challenge ahead. Tuesday evening, I drove to David's house for what I knew would be a confrontation that could destroy any remaining family relationships. But I also knew I couldn't let this theft stand unchallenged. Helen answered the door, her expression shifting from surprise to something darker when she saw my face.
Emma.
What brings you by on a weeknight? I need to talk to you about my savings account, I said directly. Your savings account? Helen's eyebrows rose in mock confusion. What about it? The $52,000 that was stolen from it during Sarah's wedding. Helen stepped aside to let me in, but her posture remained defensive. David emerged from the kitchen, looking uncomfortable. Emma, we talked about this yesterday, David said gently. You need to think clearly about what you're saying. I am thinking clearly, I replied. Helen, Marcus, and Jennifer planned and executed the theft of my entire life savings. I overheard them discussing it. Helen sat down slowly, her expression morphing into one of wounded innocence. Emma, dear, I'm concerned about you. This is a very serious accusation you're making. It's not an accusation. It's a fact. What fact? Helen's voice rose slightly. You think I somehow stole money from your account? How would I even do such a thing? I explained about Jennifer accessing my phone, about the overheard conversation, about the suspicious timing of the transfers. Helen listened with an expression of growing concern, not for my situation, but for my apparent mental state. Emma, she said when I finished, I think you need help. This level of paranoia, these conspiracy theories, it's not healthy. Where did the $50,000 gift to Sarah come from? I asked directly. You told David it came from your savings, but I heard you say the wedding depleted your account. Helen's eyes flashed dangerously. How dare you question my gift to my granddaughter? That money came from investments I've been managing for years. What investments? That's none of your business. The conversation continued in circles, with Helen maintaining her innocence while David grew increasingly uncomfortable. It became clear that directly confronting them without concrete proof was only strengthening their position. As I prepared to leave, Helen delivered what she clearly intended as a final blow. Emma, I think you're having some kind of breakdown. The stress of trying to start a business, the anniversary of your mother's death approaching, it's affecting your judgment. You should seek professional help before you destroy the relationships you have left. Wednesday morning brought an unexpected development. Marcus called me at work, his voice tense and nervous. "Emma, can we meet for coffee? I need to talk to you about what happened this weekend." We met at a neutral cafe in downtown San Diego. Marcus looked haggard, like he hadn't slept much since the wedding. "I know you think we stole from you," he began without preamble. "I don't think it," I corrected. "I know it." Marcus stared into his coffee cup. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. My heart raced. Was he about to confess? "Helen has been struggling financially," he continued. "The wedding costs, Grandpa's medical bills before he died, helping Sarah through college. It all added up. She was desperate. So, she decided to steal from me? She said it was borrowing. That you had more money than you needed, and family should help family." "Marcus, taking money without permission isn't borrowing. It's theft." He looked up, his eyes pleading. "Can't we work something out? Helen could pay you back over time. Make this a family loan instead of involving lawyers and police." "A loan requires consent from both parties," I said coldly. This was theft, pure and simple. Marcus leaned forward desperately. "Emma, if this goes legal, it could destroy our family. Sarah and Brandon don't know anything about this. Do you want to ruin their marriage with this drama? Helen should have thought about that before she stole my life savings. What if we could pay back half now?" Marcus pressed. 25,000. Would that be enough to make this go away? His desperation confirmed what I already knew. They had my money, and they were scared of the consequences. "Marcus, I want every cent returned, plus compensation for the damage this has caused to my credit, my business plans, and my life." He sat back, defeated. "Helen will never agree to that. Then Helen will face the consequences of her choices." That afternoon, I filed a police report. Detective Sarah Chen, no relation to David's family, despite the name, listened to my story with professional interest. "Financial crimes between family members are always complicated," she explained. "But if you can provide evidence of unauthorized access and premeditation, we can pursue criminal charges." The investigation moved slowly. Police interviewed Helen, Marcus, and Jennifer, all of whom denied any wrongdoing. They claimed I had given Jennifer permission to help manage financial transfers related to wedding expenses, a claim Jennifer supported with fabricated text messages. However, Detective Chen's investigation uncovered several inconsistencies in their stories. Bank records showed the transfers had been made during specific times when Jennifer admitted to having access to my phone. More importantly, the receiving account, Family Support Services, had been opened just 1 week before the wedding using Jennifer's information. 2 weeks after filing the police report, I received a call that changed everything. "Ms. Rodriguez? This is Amanda Williams from Wells Fargo Fraud Investigation. We've been reviewing unusual activity on an account linked to your case." My pulse quickened. "What kind of activity?" "The account that received your transfers has been used in several similar schemes over the past 2 years. Multiple victims, all involving family events where the perpetrator gained temporary access to phones or banking information." "You mean Jennifer has done this before?" "We believe so. We're working with law enforcement to investigate what appears to be an organized fraud ring targeting family celebrations." The revelation that Jennifer was a professional scammer, not just Marcus's misguided girlfriend, transformed the entire case. This wasn't a desperate family member making a poor choice. It was an elaborate con game that had targeted our family specifically. Detective Chin called me the next day with updates. "Emma, we've uncovered evidence that Jennifer has been running variations of this scam across Southern California. She targets families planning expensive celebrations, gains access through romantic relationships with male family members, and exploits the chaos of large events to steal financial information." "What about Helen and Marcus? Were they victims too?" "That's where it gets complicated," Detective Chin admitted. "Helen definitely knew about the theft and helped plan it. Marcus seems to have been manipulated by Jennifer, but was a willing participant. The question is how much Jennifer manipulated their desperation versus how much they independently decided to victimize you." The legal process accelerated after Jennifer's pattern was established. She was arrested on multiple fraud charges, and evidence from her apartment revealed extensive documentation of her various scams, including detailed notes about my family's financial situation and wedding plans. Most disturbing was a journal entry dated 3 months before Sarah's wedding. Target family identified. Emma Rodriguez has substantial savings, works alone, limited family support system. Wedding chaos will provide perfect cover for phone access. Marcus is completely manipulated and will follow any plan that gets him money. Helen shows sociopathic tendencies regarding Emma. View her as outsider, not real family. This will be easier than the Johnson wedding. Reading those words, I realized how carefully I had been studied and targeted. Jennifer hadn't stumbled into our family. She had chosen us specifically because she identified me as isolated and vulnerable. Helen and Marcus were arrested 3 days later. The charges against Helen were more serious because evidence showed she had initiated contact with Jennifer specifically to plan the theft. Text messages recovered from Helen's phone revealed she had been researching ways to access my savings for months before the wedding. The trial preparation process was emotionally exhausting. David, faced with undeniable evidence of his mother's crimes, finally acknowledged what had happened. But instead of supporting me, he withdrew completely, claiming he couldn't choose between family members. Sarah and Brandon's reaction was devastating in a different way. Sarah was horrified by what Helen had done but couldn't understand why I was destroying the family instead of handling it privately. "Couldn't you have just asked for the money back?" she pleaded during a tearful phone call. "Did you have to involve police and lawyers?" "Sarah, they stole from me and then lied about it," I explained. When Marcus offered to pay back half, that confirmed they had no intention of making this right without legal pressure. But now Helen might go to jail. She's 68 years old, Emma. And Marcus could lose his job. They should have thought about that before committing felonies. Our relationship, which had survived Helen's favoritism and family dynamics for years, couldn't survive the reality that Sarah prioritized protecting criminals over supporting their victim, even when that victim was her own sister. The trial took place 6 months after the wedding. Jennifer pleaded guilty to multiple fraud charges and received a 5-year sentence. Her testimony provided crucial evidence against Helen and Marcus, detailing how Helen had recruited her specifically to steal from me. Helen maintained her innocence throughout the trial, portraying herself as a grandmother who had been manipulated by a professional criminal. The evidence against her was overwhelming, but she refused to show remorse or acknowledge wrongdoing. Marcus's defense was more sympathetic. His lawyer painted him as a naive young man manipulated by both his girlfriend and his grandmother. However, his text messages showed clear knowledge of the plan and enthusiasm for the easy money. The judge's ruling was comprehensive. Helen received 2 years in prison plus restitution orders. Marcus received 1 year plus probation. Both were ordered to pay full restitution plus damages, a total of $73,000 to cover my stolen savings, legal fees, and compensation for the disruption to my business plans. "Ms. Rodriguez," the judge addressed me directly, "I want to acknowledge your courage in pursuing this case. Financial abuse within families often goes unreported because victims fear destroying relationships. However, as this case demonstrates, the perpetrators had already destroyed those relationships through their criminal choices." After the trial, I expected to feel victorious or, at least, relieved. Instead, I felt empty. I had my money back, justice had been served, but my family was gone. David couldn't look at me without guilt and resentment. Sarah blamed me for Helen's incarceration. Marcus, facing bankruptcy from legal fees and restitution payments, sent me occasional messages calling me vindictive and heartless. The only family relationship that survived was with Mom's sister, Aunt Rosa, who had supported me throughout the ordeal. "Your mother would be proud," she told me after the sentencing. "She always said you were strong enough to stand up for yourself, even against family." 6 months after the trial, I used the recovered money to start my consulting firm, Rodriguez Marketing Solutions. The business grew quickly, partly because the skills I developed in investigating and documenting my own case translated well to market research and strategy work. 1 year after the trial, I received an unexpected letter from Helen in prison. I stared at the envelope for days before opening it, unsure if I wanted to read whatever justifications or manipulations it might contain. The letter was brief and surprising. Emma, I know you will never forgive me, and I don't expect you to. Prison has given me time to think about what I did and why I did it. The truth is, I never saw you as real family. You were Elena's daughter, not David's, and I couldn't get past that distinction. When Jennifer approached me with her plan, it felt justified because I didn't consider your well-being my responsibility. I realize now that this thinking was not only wrong but cruel. You lived in our house for over a decade, and I treated you like an outsider. You deserved better from me, regardless of biology. I'm writing this not to ask for forgiveness, but to acknowledge that you were right to pursue justice. Family doesn't steal from family, and real family doesn't make distinctions based on blood. I hope you build a good life for yourself, free from people like me who couldn't see your worth. It wasn't the apology I had dreamed of receiving, but it was honest acknowledgement, more than I had expected from Helen. I didn't respond to the letter, but I kept it. Someday, it might help with the healing process I was still navigating. 2 years after the trial, Marcus reached out through a mutual cousin. He had completed his sentence and was trying to rebuild his life. He asked if we could meet to talk. We met at the same cafe where he had first tried to negotiate my silence. He looked older, thinner, and genuinely remorseful. I've been in therapy, he said without preamble, trying to understand how I got to the point where stealing from my sister seemed acceptable. And what did you learn? That I was jealous of you for years, he admitted. You were so driven, so successful, so independent. Helen always compared us unfavorably to you, which made me resent you instead of trying to improve myself. When Jennifer offered an easy way to get money and hurt you at the same time, I jumped at it. His honesty was painful, but appreciated. Marcus, I never meant to be competition for you. We could have supported each other. I know that now. Too late, but I know it. He paused, gathering courage. I'm not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did was wrong, and I'm trying to become someone who would never make that choice again. I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or false remorse. Instead, I saw genuine regret and the weight of consequences he was still living with. I appreciate you telling me this, I said carefully. It doesn't change what happened, but it helps me understand why it happened. We parted that day without hugs or promises of future contact, but with a mutual understanding that both of us were trying to build better lives from the wreckage of our family. 3 years after the trial, Sarah and Brandon divorced. The stress of family scandal, financial pressure from wedding debt, Helen's gift, had been borrowed money Sarah felt obligated to repay, and fundamental disagreements about family loyalty had torn their marriage apart. Sarah called me the night the divorce was finalized, crying and apologetic. I was wrong, Emma, she sobbed. I should have supported you instead of protecting Helen. You were the victim, and I made you feel like the criminal. Sarah, you were in an impossible situation, I replied, though her belated recognition still stung. Helen manipulated all of us. But you were strong enough to stand up to her. I wasn't. I chose the easy path of keeping peace instead of standing up for what was right. We talked for hours that night, beginning a slow process of rebuilding our relationship. It would take time to trust again, but Sarah's recognition of her mistakes was a start. 5 years after the trial, I received news that Helen had died in prison of a heart attack. David called to inform me, his voice hollow with grief and regret. The funeral is Thursday, he said. I know you probably won't want to come, but I thought you should know. I surprised myself by attending. Not to pay respects to Helen, but to support David, who despite everything was still grieving his mother. Marcus was there, looking uncomfortable but maintaining his composure. Sarah sat with Brandon's parents, having maintained a relationship with them despite the divorce. After the service, David approached me hesitantly. Emma, I owe you an apology I should have given years ago, he said quietly. I failed you when you needed support most. I chose my mother over what was right, and I've regretted it every day since. David, you were in an impossible position too, I replied, though forgiveness didn't come easily. Helen was your mother. That's no excuse for not supporting my daughter when she was the victim of a crime, he said firmly. Because that's what you are, my daughter. Not stepdaughter, not Elena's daughter. My daughter. I should have protected you instead of protecting her. His words, spoken 5 years too late, still meant something. We hugged briefly, two people who had loved each other once and might learn to again. Today, 7 years after Sarah's wedding, I run a successful consulting firm with 12 employees. I've learned to trust carefully but completely, building relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. I've also become an advocate for victims of family financial abuse, speaking at conferences and supporting legislation to strengthen protections. The lessons from my ordeal are complex. Family isn't defined by blood alone. It's defined by loyalty, respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior, even when that behavior comes from people you love. I've learned that justice and forgiveness are separate processes. I could pursue justice for the crimes committed against me while still eventually finding forgiveness for the people who committed them. But forgiveness didn't require reconciliation, and boundaries weren't barriers to love. They were requirements for healthy relationships. Most importantly, I learned that my mother's lessons about independence and financial security weren't just practical advice, they were survival skills. The strength to stand alone when necessary gave me the courage to demand justice when wronged. My savings account now holds more than the $52,300 that was stolen 7 years ago. But more valuable than the money is the knowledge that I can trust my own judgment, defend my own interests, and build a life based on my own values rather than other people's expectations. Some family relationships were lost forever in the process. Others were damaged, but eventually healed. New relationships formed with people who understood that family is what you build, not just what you're born into. The little girl who promised herself she would never be financially dependent on anyone grew into a woman who kept that promise, even when keeping it required standing against the people who were supposed to protect her. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the most important. If you're facing something similar, if family members are pressuring you to ignore financial abuse, minimize theft, or prioritize peace over justice, remember that you deserve better. Your financial security isn't selfish, it's essential. Your boundaries are mean. They're necessary. And your right to be treated with respect doesn't disappear just because someone shares your DNA. Sometimes the greatest act of love is saying no. Sometimes the most important family member to protect is yourself. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stand alone until you find people worthy of standing with you. Have you ever had to choose between family harmony and personal justice? Do you think forgiveness requires reconciliation, or can they be separate processes? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more content about setting boundaries, building financial independence, and navigating complex family dynamics. Thank you for listening to my journey. Remember, your well-being isn't negotiable. It's the foundation everything else is built on.